Well, can I thank you for your warm welcome and say, firstly, it's a pleasure to celebrate with Alistair Carmichael and the rest of the Scottish team our successful cross-party campaign to keep the United Kingdom united. Now, British politics owes a lot to Scotland. Some of our greatest political leaders, there were few greater than Gladstone, who was born in Liverpool, but he was a Scottish MP. And his feats of oratory were legendary. And not least was his speech in the debate on the Bulgarian atrocities. And he is said to have spoken for 5.5 hours, without notes, from memory. And as far as we know, he didn't have to issue a statement the following day apologizing for forgetting to mention Bulgaria or the atrocities. And others have sought to emulate him. You may remember the Prime Minister's feat, which won him the leadership of the Tory party, memorizing a 45-minute speech. And he talked about the things that he cared passionately about: embracing the underclass, saving the planet. You may remember the hoodies and the huskies. But it does raise an interesting political question. Is it worse for politicians to forget what to say, or to remember what to say, but to forget to do anything about it? I think the last two party conferences have helped us to understand our opponents better. The Tories are reinventing themselves as UKIP, but without the beer. And the Labour Party is offering us Hollande socialism, but without the sex. But today I want to talk about us, not about them, and what we've actually done in government, what we've delivered. Because I vividly remember a bumpy conference 5 years ago when we were the first party to confront the need for cuts and tax rises after the budget had been shot to pieces by the banking crisis. And I also remember how we undertook then that if we found ourselves in government, that we would prioritise cutting income tax for the low paid. And we have delivered both of them in office. And let's remember why we're in government. We joined the coalition because there was a national economic emergency. We worked with the Tories because voters chose them as the largest party, not because we like them or because we are like them. We have been a major engine of reform and not just a brake on their extremes. We're sometimes accused of abandoning progressive politics, but we haven't. What we have abandoned is the politics of perpetual protest. And Nick Clegg's biggest achievement as our party leader has been to make that massive transformation. We followed President Clinton's mantra. You may remember, it's the economy, stupid. And we now have a record of contributing to a recovery with strong growth and jobs and investor confidence. And given where we started from in 2010, in the aftermath of the biggest economic crisis in a generation, that is a major success. But nobody should be complacent. The economy is still dangerously dependent on the drug of cheap money. Some of the stress factors which preceded the crisis, like the serious housing inflation, the mountain of mortgage debt, weak trade performance, those are still with us. And one of the lingering legacies is the budget deficit. And yes, the deficit has to be dealt with. But the need for budget discipline mustn't become an obsession with ever deeper cuts in public spending. Key public services have already been cut to the bone, from legal aid, local government, to policing and defence. And the Tories are ideologically obsessed by cuts because they see it as a way of destroying public service and the welfare state which they detest. So let's be clear. The Tories' proposal to take another 25 billion or more out of welfare and unprotected government departments will do great harm to valuable services and to millions of working people on low incomes. And to imagine otherwise is a fantasy. And I'm sure most of you will categorically not go along with all this. So you may ask, what's the alternative? The truth is that more taxes will be needed to contribute to deficit reduction and also to address unacceptable inequalities. And any politician who tells you that the next government can balance the budget and avoid tax increases is lying to you. There is a role, too, for more public borrowing by central and local government to finance productive investment in transport and housing and innovation. Because when interest rates are so low, borrowing for investment is actually a no-brainer. And it's got nothing to do with deficit reduction. Now, of course, we have to protect the next generation from too much public as well as private debt. But the next generation would certainly not thank us for a legacy of underinvestment and overstretched infrastructure and unaffordable homes. We've also got to communicate to the country our long-term vision of what we want the economy to look like. It's got to be knowledge-based and outward-looking and green. And a key step is the industrial strategy, which I put in place and has the support of key business sectors from creative industries and life sciences to aerospace and cars. And the Tories, not to be outdone, call it a long-term economic plan. That's a bit Soviet for my taste, but anyway, I think we're essentially on the same page. An industrial strategy is not about going back to discredited ideas from the past. The government does not know better than business where to invest and what to produce. But we've also moved on from discredited ideas of laissez-faire. We can't just sit back and let it all happen. Markets are, of course, necessary, but markets also fail. The state is also necessary to build business confidence, to create certainty around regulation, to promote competition, to sponsor research and innovation, and to ensure that the workforce has necessary skills, and to protect consumers and workers and the environment. And the industrial strategy, as I see it, is a public-private partnership writ large. And it's also long-term, because our business culture is far too often dominated by short-term shareholder returns. And in reality, it needs a decade, or several in some cases, to develop the generation of energy-efficient vehicle engines to produce new cancer drugs, to develop offshore wind or gas fields, to create new railways or design and build new aircraft. And the industrial strategy helps to make these things possible, and it is working. Which takes me to finance. 6 years after the banking crisis, banks are still taking more money out of small and medium-sized companies than they're putting in. But thanks to interventions by Liberal Democrats in government, things are now getting better. Legislation has effectively separated the Risco-Casino banking from mainstream banking. The British Business Bank, which I announced at our conference 2 years ago, is now growing rapidly, providing finance to small and medium-sized companies, including 32,000 startups, which couldn't otherwise get loans from high street banks. The Regional Growth Fund has allocated $3 billion, which will create and safeguard over 500,000 jobs. And the Green Investment Bank, which is based down the road in Edinburgh, has committed over $1.4 billion to green projects, like, in fact, the new street lighting in Glasgow here. And nowhere is a long-term perspective more necessary than in educating our population for a competitive knowledge economy. And that's why I was determined from day one of our government to breathe life back into apprenticeships and into adult education. And I drew on inspiration from my parents, who left school at 15 to work in factories, and who got on in life through vocational education and adult learning. And in government, we've launched almost 2 million apprenticeships, which is a quantum leap in ambition. And we're now reforming them to improve quality and employability. And I want to see apprenticeships properly valued. So today I'm proposing a £1 an hour increase in the minimum wage for all first-year apprentices, and I'm writing to the Low Pay Commission to put this in place. And beyond that, I want to see a big expansion in degree-level, advanced apprenticeships, so as to end the false apartheid between academic and vocational education. And I want a big expansion of community adult education, including helping the mentally ill to be properly integrated back in society, working with my colleague Norman Lamb. We need these skills because the rest of the world isn't standing still. Globalization proceeds apace. We need a well-educated, well-trained population that is adaptable and creative and is outward-looking. And that isn't politically easy because many voters feel financially squeezed and insecure, and they want government to look after their own, resulting in defensive, inward-looking policies. The truth is that the politics of identity is on the march in many parts of the world, and we see it here in the debates around Scottish independence, the questioning of our open trading system, membership of the European Union, and above all, immigration. Now, I believe our party has a massive responsibility here, which is to be the voice of sanity and seriousness and sense, and standing up to the purveyors of panic and prejudice and pessimism. And the Tories, for their part, are horribly torn between open economic liberalism and their inward-looking, UKIP-facing grassroots, who probably see Clacton-on-Sea as the new Constantinople, holding out against the alien hordes. So they say they want Britain to be open for business and to win the global race. And then they try to close the borders to skills and talents that Britain needs by pursuing an absolutely absurd immigration target, which is plucked out of the air and totally unenforceable. Overseas students, for example, whose fees subsidize British students and earn us $9 billion a year in the UK, are discouraged, and so off they go to the United States or Australia. Firms who need specialist skills from Japan or India or the United States have to climb piles of red tape, far bigger than anything generated by the bureaucrats in Brussels. And we then train Chinese engineers and insist they go home just when British industry can make good use of them. But of course, there's always room and a warm welcome, isn't there, for dodgy billionaires willing to make a large party contribution for a game of tennis with Dave and Boris. Now, our responsibility as Liberal Democrats is to tell the uncomfortable truth, that the vast majority of migrants coming to the UK, whether it's from inside or outside the European Union, have brought tangible benefits to the economy, they import valuable skills, and they strengthen our civic culture. Now, of course, immigration does have to be controlled at the point of entry and exit. And we've got to deal with the abuse and crack down on benefit tourism, but not at the expense of the European single market and its valuable free movement of workers. But just as the free movement of labour attacks benefit tourism, the free movement of capital attracts tax tourism. I strongly agree with George Osborne. My God, did I really say that? I strongly agree with George Osborne that we have to stop the Amazons and Googles operating tax avoidance dodges. And I believe, I'm not sure he does, but I believe that there is no future for Britain freelancing as a tax haven, whether it's Liechtenstein on Thames or Cayman on the Clyde. I believe the British public will support an open market economy if they feel it is fair. And that's what lies behind our mantra of a stronger economy and a fairer society. And thanks to Liberal Democrats in government, there is a right to shared parental leave and for all employees to request flexible working. And I pay tribute to my colleague Jo Swinson for the work that she's doing in my department on that end. We can now say that company bosses' pay is fully transparent and subject to a binding vote by shareholders. We've created the country's largest worker share ownership scheme. We've modernised and protected the country's 11,000 post offices. We're successfully promoting diversity in the boardroom. Every FTSE 100 company now has a woman on the board. And we're going to do the same now for ethnic minorities. We've also strengthened the minimum wage enforcement system, and I have overseen the first above-inflation increase in the minimum wage since the financial crisis. We're moving on to outlaw abuses in zero-hour contracts. We're supporting farmers and local pubs against the unfair use of corporate power by supermarkets and large brewers. One thing we have stopped is allowing the Tories to bring in ruthless hire-and-fire legislation. We've always understood that a successful economy needs a flexible labour market, but not so flexible that workers live in fear. I believe strongly that we should be a pro-business party, but we should also be a pro-worker party. And that's why today I'm launching a wide-ranging inquiry into the additions of large numbers of workers, and there could be 1 million, who fall through the cracks and don't currently have full employment rights. The current bureaucratic system enforcing them has failed, and it needs radical reform. Now, there is, of course, much, much more to be done. But we have a real record of achievement in government. In very, very difficult circumstances, we've brought compassion and common sense and competence into government. We've maintained our liberal and social democratic values in doing so. And we have stood up to the born-to-rule arrogance of our coalition partners, as well as the narrow tribalism of the Labour opposition. There is a lot there to be proud of, and we must be proud of it. Thank you.